Beyond the hidden chapter, a storm took him from 1881 and dropped him into the future. I was 24 years old the night I stopped being part of the world, and I did not feel myself leave it. That is the part no one believes when I tell them. They expect a great rending, some violence done to the body, a sensation of being pulled apart and stitched together again. There was none of that. There was a road, and a storm, and a flash of light, and then there was a road again. The same road. The same hedgerows black against the sky. The same smell of rain on chalk. I brushed the wet from my coat and thought only of how cross my mother would be that I had ruined another pair of boots. My name is Thomas Whitmore. I was born in the spring of 1857 in the county of Wiltshire, the second son of a clergyman who had wanted me for the church and got an engineer instead. I built railways. I want you to understand that before anything else, because everything that has happened to me since has tried to make me into a curiosity, a ghost, a riddle to be solved by clever men. But I was a real person first. I had cold hands and a weakness for sweet tea and a habit of whistling badly when I was nervous. I loved a woman named Eleanor Hart, and I was on my way to her father's house the night the sky turned green. It was the 3rd of October, 1881. I had spent the week surveying a cutting near Devizes, a long wound in the hillside where we meant to lay new track, and I was walking the last 4 miles home because the trap had thrown a wheel, and I was young enough to think the walk would do me good. The afternoon had been ordinary, gray, close, the light the color of weak ale, crows in the stubble fields. A farmer raised his hand to me from a gate, and I raised mine back, and I have thought since that he may have been the last person from my own century ever to greet me as one of his own. The change came on quickly. I have tried 100 times to describe it, and I always fail, because the words we have are for ordinary weather, and this was not ordinary. First, the wind died entirely, which is a thing that happens before a storm and frightens no one. But then the birds went. I did not see them fly off. I simply became aware, the way you become aware of a clock that has stopped ticking, that the hedgerows had gone silent. No sparrows, no rooks complaining in the elms, nothing. Then the light failed, and what replaced it was green. Not the green of leaves or of the sea, but a sick, luminous green, as though the whole vault of the sky had been poured full of some chemist's solution and lit from behind. The clouds did not move like clouds. They turned. They wheeled overhead in a slow spiral, and at the center of that spiral was a stillness that I felt in my teeth. I took out my pocket watch. I do not know why. Some instinct in me wanted a fixed point, a thing of brass and glass that obeyed laws I understood. My father had given me that watch when I took my first post. I opened the case and looked at the hands, and the hands were spinning backwards, not falling, not broken, spinning. The second hand sweeping anti-clockwise, and the minute hand chasing it, faster than any spring could drive them, and I remember laughing, one short disbelieving bark of a laugh, because the mind reaches for laughter when it has nothing else to reach for. The hair on my arm stood up beneath my sleeves. The air tasted of metal and of burning, though nothing burned. I felt the ground hum. And then, perhaps 30 yards off, in the open field to my right, the world came apart in white. The lightning did not look like lightning. It did not fork down from above. It rose. A column of white fire stood up out of the earth and joined the spinning sky, and the sound of it arrived inside my skull rather than through my ears, and the last thing I knew of the 3rd of October, 1881, was the smell of my own scorched eyebrows and a brightness so total that it was indistinguishable from darkness. Then the road again. The wet road, the black hedges, the chalk smell of the rain. I got to my feet. My head ached abominably, and there was a ringing in my ears, but I could stand, I could walk, and the storm had passed entirely. The sky overhead was an ordinary night sky, deep and clear, with more stars in it than I thought I had ever seen, though I put that down then to the storm having scrubbed the air clean. My watch had stopped. The hand sat dead at 6:15. I shook it, held it to my ear, heard nothing, and put it away. I was perhaps a mile from the village of Lytham St. Cross, where Eleanor's father kept his house, and I walked toward it with the particular gratitude of a man who has been frightened and is no longer. I rehearsed how I would tell the story. I would make it funny. I would make Eleanor laugh and put her hand to her mouth the way she did. I would not tell her about the watch, I decided, because she would worry, and I did not want her to worry. The first thing I noticed was the light. There was too much of it, and it was the wrong color. As I came over the rise where the lane bent down toward the village, I expected the few warm windows of the cottages, the lamp outside the bell, perhaps a candle in the church. Instead, the whole of the valley below me glowed. A hard, white, sourceless light lay over everything, and strung along the line of the main road were lamps that burned without flame, steady as painted suns, brighter than any gas I had ever seen. And there was a sound under it all, a low, continuous rushing, like a river, except that there was no river there. I thought quite calmly that I had not yet woken, that I was lying in the field with my scorched eyebrows and dreaming, and that the dream had a great deal of detail to it but was a dream nonetheless. I went on. A dreaming man may as well go on. The cottages were gone. Where they had stood there were houses I did not understand. Square, hard-edged, with great sheets of unbroken glass for windows and surfaces that did not look like brick or stone or timber. The road itself was not a road but a black ribbon, smooth as a frozen pond, painted with white and yellow lines as straight as anything off a drawing board. I knelt and touched it. It was hard and slightly warm and smelled faintly of tar, and it was real beneath my fingers in a way that dreams are not. And then the thing came. It came around the bend with a roar and two blazing eyes of white light, a great hurtling mass of metal and glass moving faster than a galloping horse, faster than a train, and it screamed past me close enough to slap me with a wall of wind and was gone, its red tail lights shrinking up the road. I had thrown myself into the hedge. I lay there with thorns in my neck and my heart going like a hammer, and I understood in the animal part of me that understands before the mind will allow it, that I was not dreaming, and that I was not in any place or time that I knew. I will not pretend to dignity about what followed. I walked into that village like a drunkard, touching walls, stopping to stare at things, my mouth open. There was a glowing sign in a window, red letters that hummed, and they spelled a word, open. And I stood before it for what must have been a full minute simply because the letters held still and meant something, and the rest of the world had stopped meaning anything at all. A man came out of a doorway nearby. He wore strange, close-fitting clothes and held to his ear a small black tablet that glowed, and he was speaking to it, speaking to no one, laughing at no one, and when he saw me he stopped. I must have been a sight. Soot on my face, a hole burned in my coat, my collar and my watch chain and my whole manner of dress 100 years out of any fashion he had ever seen. He looked at me the way you look at a man who might be dangerous or might be merely mad, and he said something. "You all right, mate?" And the words were English, my own English, but flattened and quickened and strange, and I could not make my mouth produce an answer. "What year is it?" I said. I had not planned to say it. It came up out of me like water out of a spring. He laughed, uncertain. "It's 2024, mate. You been on the sauce." 2024. I want to tell you that I fainted, or that I wept, or that I seized the man by the collar and demanded the truth. I did none of those things. The number was too large to be felt. It was like being told the distance to a star. I simply stood there and let it sit on me, and the man, deciding I was harmless and beyond his help, moved off with a backward glance, and I was alone again under those flameless lamps. 143 years. The arithmetic came to me slowly and then all at once, the way cold water finds you through a coat. Eleanor had been 22. If she had lived a long life, a good full ordinary life, she had died perhaps 50 or 60 years before this man was born. My mother. My father in his study with his sermons. My brother Edward, who would inherit nothing and resent me for it. The farmer at the gate. The men I had surveyed the cutting with, who would have walked back to Devizes that evening wondering where young Whitmore had got to, who would have searched the lanes, dragged the mill pond perhaps, written to my father, given me up at last for drowned, or fled, or murdered. All of them, every one, dead and buried and their gravestones gone soft and green with a century of rain. I sat down on the curb of that black road in the white light, and I put my head in my hands, and the thing that broke in me was not fear. Fear had passed. What broke in me was grief, pure and enormous. Grief with no funeral and no body and no one in all the world to share it, because the only people who could have mourned with me were the very people I was mourning. They were kind to me. I must say that, because in the months that followed I came to mistrust a great many things about the world I had woken into, but the kindness was real. A woman found me. Her name was Mrs. Okafor, and she had stopped her motor car, which is what those hurtling things are called, because she saw a man weeping on the roadside in clothes from a museum, and she could not in conscience drive past. She took me to a hospital, which is a building of such size and brightness and complexity that I cannot describe it without sounding as though I am inventing. They examined me. They could find nothing wrong with me but bewilderment, and bewilderment, it turned out, was the one thing none of their wondrous machines could cure. It was a young doctor named Priya Sharma who first believed me. Not at once. No one believed me at once, and I do not blame them. For if a man had come to me in 1881 claiming to have stepped out of the reign of George III, I should have thought him a lunatic or a liar. But Dr. Sharma was curious where others were merely cautious, and curiosity is its own kind of mercy. She sat with me. She asked me questions, and she listened to the answers as though they mattered. I told her everything. I told her about the cutting at Devizes and the throne wheel and the long walk home. I told her about the silence of the birds and the green sky and the watch spinning backwards. I told her about Eleanor. I described my world to her in the way you might describe a country you have lost. The gas lamps and the horse dung and the coal smoke that lay over every town like a brown blanket, the sound of hooves on cobbles before dawn, the way a letter took 2 days and how that was thought miraculous, the smell of my father's pipe, the particular green of the Wiltshire Downs in June. And the things I described, she could check. That is what changed it from a madman's tale into a problem. I knew things. I knew the names of streets in a town that had been rebuilt twice over. I knew the price of a third-class railway ticket from Swindon to Bath in 1881. I knew the engineering of a kind of bridge that no living person had built in a century, and when they brought me paper, I drew it, the calculations and all, in a hand and a notation that an old archivist wept to see, because she said no one had written figures that way since before her grandmother was born. My speech, my idioms, the very shape of my teeth, and the old smallpox vaccination scar on my arm, all of it was wrong for 2024, and exactly right for the year I claimed. The doctors gave way to the scientists, and the scientists gave way, eventually and reluctantly, to the journalists, and that was when my private grief became a public spectacle. You cannot imagine, perhaps you can, you who live here, what it is to become famous in a world you do not understand. They put my face on those glowing tablets that everyone carries. They argued about me on programs broadcast into every home. Some said I was a fraud, a brilliant performance artist, an actor with an unusually deep grasp of Victorian minutiae. Some said I was a man with amnesia who had wandered out of an institution. A great many said cruel and clever things about me without ever having met me, which I came to learn is a particular sport of this age, made possible by the machines that let everyone speak to everyone at once, and no one truly listened to anyone at all. But some believed. And among those who believed, a question took hold that was larger than me, and it was this. If it had happened to Thomas Whitmore, had it happened before? The man who pursued that question hardest was a historian named Daniel Brandt. He found me about 2 months after I arrived, when the first storm of attention had begun to die down, and I had been moved into the quiet care of the university. He was a heavy, untidy man with kind eyes and ink on his fingers, real ink, which endeared him to me at once. And he had spent 15 years, long before he ever heard of me, collecting accounts of unexplained disappearances. He had a theory that no one had taken seriously, and then I walked out of a field in Wiltshire and made it the most important theory in the world. He laid his evidence out for me across a long table, and I will tell you it was among the strangest hours of my whole strange new life, because I was looking at the proof that I was not alone, and the proof was a catalogue of the lost. There was a fishing smack out of Whitby, he said, that vanished in 1746 with 6 men aboard, on a clear day, within sight of shore, after the lookout in the harbor reported the sky turning a foul and unnatural green, and the water going flat as glass. No wreckage was ever found. There was a surveyor in the American territories in 1804, a man not unlike myself, Brant noted with a small sad smile, who walked away from his camp into a queer green dusk, with his instruments and his pocket compass spinning, his companion said, like a top, and was never seen again. There was a regiment's worth of accounts from sailors, scattered across 3 centuries, all describing the same green light, the same dead air, the same vanished birds. There was an aviator, a woman, lost over open water in the 1930s, whose final transmission, Brant played it for me, a voice crackling out of the past as the dead do not usually speak, described the sky ahead as the wrong color entirely, before it cut to silence. There were hikers, whole parties of them, in mountains all over the world, gone without a trace in sudden freak storms that the weathermen of their day could not account for. There were children. There was a boy who walked out into a field in Ontario in 1978 to bring in the cows before a storm and never came back. And the storm, his mother always said, wasn't right. It was green. I'll go to my grave saying it was green. Dozens of them. Dozens that Brant could document, and he believed thousands he could not. Scattered like dropped coins across the whole length of recorded history, in every land, among every people, connected by nothing except the manner of their going. A green sky, dead air, silent birds. A storm that came from nowhere and left nothing. And not one of them had ever come back. Not one, in all the centuries, until me. Why me? I asked him. Why should I return when none of the others did? He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said the most honest thing anyone said to me in all my time in that age. I don't know, Thomas. I don't think you returned. I think you arrived. I think you all went somewhere, or somewhen, and you're the first one we happen to have caught at the far end of it. The others may be arriving still, in other years. We just aren't there to meet them. I have thought about that sentence more than I have thought about anything else in my life. I should tell you about the loneliness, because the science of the thing was only ever the smallest part of it, and if you take nothing else from my account, take this. The world I woke into is a marvel. I will not be one of those sour old men who pretends the past was better. I have stood in a room and spoken to a man in Australia and watched his face as he spoke back, the two of us divided by the whole breadth of the earth and joined by a wire and a pane of glass. I have flown in a machine above the clouds with a cup of tea in my hand as though it were nothing, and looked down on England spread out below me like a map, and I have understood for the first time in my life how small and how precious it all is. I have learned that the diseases that carried off half the children of my parish are gone, simply gone, conquered, and that a man may now expect to bury his parents rather than his children, and when I learned that I had to leave the room, because it was too much, because it was the thing we prayed for and never dared to hope. There is so much light here, so much warmth, so much food, so much knowledge poured out so freely that the people who have it cannot see it anymore, the way a fish cannot see water. I have wept at the beauty of this age more times than I can count, and I have never been so alone. Do you know what it is to have no one who remembers the same things you remember? That is the true exile, not the strangeness of the machines. One grows used to machines. It is that there is no living soul who knows the smell of my mother's kitchen, or the sound of the bell at Lytham St. Cross, or the way Eleanor laughed, or what it felt like to be young in the year 1881 with the whole of an ordinary life ahead of you. All of that lives now in one place only, behind my own eyes, and when I die it dies, and there is no one to hand it to. I am the last speaker of a language that everyone else who spoke it has taken into the grave. I went to find them. Of course I went to find them. Brant took me, in his motor car, on a gray afternoon, to the churchyard at Latham St. Cross, which still stands though the village around it has been swallowed by something they call a commuter town. The church is the same. The very stones are the same, worn and patient, and I put my hand on the porch where I had stood 1,000 times, and it was the one thing in all the world that touched me back from across the gulf. I found my father's grave, the Reverend Josiah Whitmore, and beside him my mother Margaret, and the dates told me she had outlived him by 11 years, which I had not known, and which undid me, because I had never thought of my mother as a widow, and now I never could think of her as anything else. I found my brother Edward dead in 1923, and the small stones of his children, my nephews and nieces whom I never met and who are themselves now long dead. And then, in the far corner, under a yew, I found her. Eleanor Hart, the stone said. And then beneath, in letters the lichen had nearly taken, beloved wife of George Aldridge, and then her dates. She had died in 1934. She had been 75 years old. She married. She married a man named George Aldridge, and she lived, and from the other stones gathered close around hers, I could see that she had had children and grandchildren, and that she had lived to be an old woman surrounded by them. And I stood there in the wet grass 143 years too late, and I felt the most extraordinary thing, which was not jealousy, and was not grief, or was not only those things. It was relief. It was a vast and breaking relief, because I had been afraid. I had not known until that moment how afraid I had been, that she had spent her life waiting for me, that she had grieved me and never recovered, that I had ruined her with my vanishing. But she had not waited. She had mourned me, I am sure, the way you mourn a young man lost in a storm, and then she had done the brave and right and ordinary thing. She had gone on living. She had loved someone else. She had grown old and full of years with her family around her. The girl I loved had had a whole long life, every day of which I had missed, and I was glad of it, and the gladness hurt more than any grief I have ever known. I knelt, and I cleared the lichen from her name with my thumb so that I could read it plainly, and I told her, I am not ashamed of this, I told her out loud that I was sorry I was late, and that I was glad she had not waited, and that I had loved her, and I stayed until the light went, and Brant, who had stood a long way off all that while with his hat in his hands, came and quietly took me home. It was Dr. Sharma's people, the scientists, who found the pattern in time to give me my choice. I do not fully understand the work, though they tried to teach me. They had taken every account that Brant had collected, every date and place and description, and they had set their machines to look for an order in it, the way you might look for the timetable hidden inside 1,000 observed trains. And they found one. Not a perfect one. The disappearances were too scattered, the old records too poor, but a tendency, a rhythm, a set of conditions that gathered and built, and every so often broke. The atmosphere, the sun's own weather, the magnetism of the earth, things I have no words for, they aligned rarely, unpredictably, but not unknowably. And the machines, fed on 3 centuries of the lost, said that the conditions were gathering again, that within a matter of weeks, in a particular place, and the place, when they told me, made me cold all over because it was not 40 miles from the cutting at Devizes, the sky might once again turn green. They did not tell me this to tempt me, I want to be clear. Sharma and Brant and the others, they were good people, and they argued among themselves for days about whether to tell me at all, because they could see plainly what I could see, that to step back into that storm would be very likely to step into death, or into something worse than death, an endless arriving in years that have no one in them I know. The others never came back. There was no reason on earth to believe that I would be the exception twice. But they told me, because they had decided, Sharma told me this, with tears in her own eyes, that it was not their choice to make, it was mine. I was the only man alive who had the right to decide whether Thomas Whitmore went back into the green. So I had my choice, and I will tell you honestly that I turned it over for many nights and found no peace in it. I could stay. I had begun, in spite of everything, to build something here. I had work. They had found that an engineer is an engineer in any century, and that my hands and my eye for the way a thing should be made were not made worthless by 143 years. I was learning, slowly, the new mathematics and the new materials, and there was a deep and steadying joy in it. I had friends, Brant with his ink-stained fingers, who had become to me something like a brother, Sharma, who had believed me first, Mrs. Okafor, who still telephoned me every Sunday to be sure I was eating. I was no longer a curiosity in the newspapers. I was becoming slowly a man with a life. I could grow old here, in this warm and brilliant and lonely age, and it would be a good life, and I knew it. And yet, every night I dreamed of the green sky. Not with fear. That is the strange thing. I dreamed of it the way you dream of a door left open in a house you have left. The storm had taken everything from me, and the storm was the only road back, and even if that road led nowhere, even if it led only into the white fire and out the other side into death, it was mine in a way that nothing in this gentle century could ever quite be. I did not want to die. I want to be understood on that point. I had found reasons to live. But there is a difference between finding reasons to live and finding a home, and a man can feel the lack of the second, even with his arms full of the first. What decided me in the end was not grief, and it was not hope, and it was not even loneliness, though all of those were in it. What decided me was a question I could not stop asking. Where did they go? The fisherman of Whitby, the surveyor with his spinning compass, the aviator with her wrong-colored sky, the boy sent out for the cows. Dozens of them, hundreds, scattered down all the centuries, gone into the green and never seen again. I had assumed, as everyone assumed, that they had simply died. But I had stepped into the green and I had not died. I had arrived. And if I had arrived, then perhaps they had arrived too. Somewhere, somewhen. And the thought of all those lost people arriving alone, with no Mrs. Okafor to stop her car for them, no Dr. Sharma to believe them, no Brant to lay out the proof that they were real, was more than I could bear to leave unanswered. I am an engineer. We are not, as a rule, mystical men. But I had begun to believe that the storm was not an accident and not a punishment. I had begun to believe it was a thing that took people somewhere on purpose, and that I was, for whatever reason, the one it had let come back far enough to be found, and that to refuse to go on was to leave a job half done. To survey the cutting and never lay the track. I told them on a Tuesday. Brant put his head in his hands. Sharma argued with me for 3 hours, and then stopped, because she saw it was no use, and held my hand instead. They made me promise things I could not promise. They gave me instruments to carry, small, marvelous things, recorders, beacons, in the faint hope that wherever I went I might find a way to send word back. I took them, though I did not believe in them, because it was a kindness, and I had learned to accept kindness. On the last night, Brant and I sat up late, and he asked me if I was afraid, and I told him the truth, which was that I was, but that I had been more afraid these months, of waking every morning into a world where no one remembered the things I remembered, and that the fear of the storm was at least a clean fear, a young man's fear, the kind I had felt on the night it all began. He nodded. He understood. He gave me his fountain pen, the one with the ink that had endeared him to me on the first day, and I have it still, and I have used it to write these very words. The place they took me was a wide bare hill under an enormous sky, a place chosen because their machine said the green would come there if it came anywhere. We waited 2 days in a little encampment of tents and humming equipment, and I will not pretend they were easy days. Sharma barely slept. Brant told me stories of the people he had spent his life chasing, the lost ones, as though by speaking their names he could send them my regards. It came at dusk on the 3rd day, and it came exactly as it had come before, so exactly that for one reeling moment I was 24 again on the road home, with ruined boots and a head full of Eleanor. The wind died. Every machine in the camp began at once to shriek and stutter. The birds, there had been larks over the hill all day, fell silent, all together, the way they had fallen silent in Wiltshire 143 years and a few weeks before. And the light failed, and what poured in to replace it was that same sick, luminous green, that chemist's solution green lit from behind, and the clouds began their slow, terrible wheeling, and I felt the old hum come up through the soles of my feet and into my teeth. I shook Brant's hand. I could not hear what he said. The air was full of that rising metal and burning smell, and the shrieking of the instruments, and the sound, that low rushing sound, that I now think is the sound the storm makes when it opens. I embraced Dr. Sharma. I took out my father's watch. They had mended it for me here, in this age, a small miracle among so many large ones. And I opened the case, and even as I looked, the hands began to turn backwards, slow and then faster, the second hand sweeping anti-clockwise, the minute hand chasing it, and I laughed. One short, disbelieving bark of a laugh, exactly as I had laughed the first time, because the mind reaches for laughter when it has nothing else to reach for. I walked out into the field, away from the lights and the people, toward the still center where the green was deepest. I heard Sharma cry out behind me once. I did not turn. The hair stood up on my arms beneath my sleeves. The ground hummed, and ahead of me, perhaps 30 yards off, in the open, the world stood up in a column of white fire and joined the spinning sky, and the sound of it arrived inside my skull rather than through my ears, and I walked into a brightness so total that it was indistinguishable from darkness, and I thought, with the last clear thought I had, of a farmer raising his hand to me from a gate. Then stillness, then ground beneath my feet. I waited for the road. The wet road, the black hedges, the chalk smell of Wiltshire rain. I had told myself I did not believe I would go home, that home was 143 years in its grave, but the heart believes what it wishes to believe, and mine had wished, in that last instant, for the lane down to Latham St. Cross, and a girl who had been dead for 90 years waiting at the end of it. It was not the road. I opened my eyes to light, but not the green light and not the white fire. A clean gold, even light, like a morning, though I could not find the sun. I was standing on a smooth pale surface, warm underfoot, and around me, above me, impossibly far above me, rose shapes I have no words for, towers of glass and light that did not so much stand against the sky as grow into it, curving, gleaming, alive with motion, threaded with bright moving lines that I slowly understood were roads in the air, full of silent traffic. There were green things everywhere. Gardens hung on the sides of those great towers, falling like water. The air smelled of nothing at all, which is to say it smelled clean, cleaner than any air I have ever breathed, cleaner than the air after the storm scrubbed it on the night this all began. It was a city. It was a city as far beyond the world of 2024 as that world had been beyond my own, and I understood, with the same slow, cold arithmetic that had found me once before on a curb under a flameless lamp, that I had not gone back. I had gone on, further on. The storm does not return its people. It only ever carries them forward, deeper into the dark, into years that have no one in them we know. And I had stepped into it of my own free will, with my eyes open, and it had taken me the way it took the fisherman and the surveyor and the aviator and the boy sent out for the cows, forward, always forward, to some far shore none of them had ever lived to describe. I should have felt despair. I have wondered since why I did not. Perhaps there is a limit to how much a man can lose before loss itself becomes a country he has learned to live in. I stood in that golden light, alone, 100 years past the only friends I had left in all of time, and I waited almost calmly to be a curiosity again, to be doubted and examined and put behind glass. And then I saw her. A woman was walking toward me across that pale, warm ground. She was unhurried. She wore clothing I did not understand, simple and pale and somehow lit from within, and she was looking at me directly, without surprise, without fear, the way you look at a guest you have been expecting for a very long time. She stopped a few feet from me. She had a kind face. She looked at me the way Dr. Sharma had looked at me on the first day, and the way the historian Brant had looked at me across his table of the lost, and I realized that I had been waiting my whole second life to be looked at exactly like that, as though I were known. She smiled. "You're early," she said. "We've been waiting for you,